And I'm speaking to
Fred Lokken, Professor of Political Science at Trenton Rose Community College.
And Professor Lokken, I'm here today to ask you some questions about the current situation with the Washoe County Republican Party and how that plays a part in not just here locally, but also what's the bigger picture of this whole event from your perspective?
Well, the state Republican Party has been dealing with a number of issues statewide for a very long period of time. It goes back more than 10 years. They had a very large argument with the Libertarians, which were able to, frankly, come into the party and kind of dominate it for a number of years. Then they shifted to a strong conservative theme that made many in the party rhinos, in their opinion. And so people like Mark Amadei or Ryan Sandoval were labeled as rhinos. So a lot of Republicans that have voted Republican in the state have become refugee status over in the nonpartisan list. The party has lost a following. It has, a lot of Republicans don't identify with what the party as it is structured identifies with, because it's sort of a more conservative view than the party has historically held. And that is true here, and it's true down in Clark County. And so, there have been headlines, there have been problems, there have been fistfights and party events, both at the county level and at the state level. This is, people passion in politics. But now there is a new element. It started down in Clark County with what would be identified as strong Donald Trump supporters that ousted the county party leadership for the Republican Party. That then, by showing up in numbers, right, they were able to vote in their leadership because it's based on who shows up. And they tried going to court, and the court said this is an internal party issue, you've got to resolve it. So there's no way that the party is talking to itself very well right now, so they've had a difficulty resolving it. It appears that, what I'm understanding is we're seeing the exact same thing develop now in Washoe County, of a group of strong Donald Trump backers focused on sort of Trump candidates and the Trump agenda for the 2022 election. And the party that was in place and the leadership that was in place was focused on a broader agenda, but has now, found leadership and membership on their boards that is trying to pull askew from that, to pull it even farther to the right with that very specific Donald Trump, making it kind of a Donald Trump party in both the North and the South. The state party is kind of already there. Laxalt has been a large player in the state party, so it's the state party, I think, influencing what's going on now in Clark and in Washoe. That's different. In one sense, it's difficult. In another sense, it isn't. The Republican Party, as a state and as a county entity, has lost a lot of its influence in the party process. Doesn't seem to have much control over who decides to run for office. Those are things that a party is supposed to kind of create some order so there isn't chaos. It should be, providing structure and training, and connections so somebody understands how to run for office, recruiting, so that you have a strong slate for various offices. And the Republican Party has had a real struggle doing that in the state for a very long period of time, and more recently in both Washoe and Clark. And 95% of the state population is in Washoe and Clark. So you're talking about the state party activities in those two counties. As I say, an amazing number of Republicans have left the Republican Party and have taken up residency in the nonpartisan category. It's over 30% of state registrations. This is true nationally. So to keep perspective, it's going on in every state. It's okay.
Do you have a calendar?
I really don't.
You're back.
And so we have seen patterns of this, and what we're seeing right now in 2021 is very similar to what we've seen other players, but we're seeing the same endemic problems to the Republican Party, and they now have erupted in the Democratic Party. Tink Sigerboom was supposed to become the new chair of Clark County, and ousted by progressives. You have a change of the state party that forced both Sisolak and Masto to establish a new Democratic Party here in the northern part of the state that will be helping those two candidates run their campaigns for 2022. So it's not alone. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party is doing what the Trump wing of the Republican Party is doing, which is a very disruptive role to be able to come in and basically, through their numbers, take over the party apparatus.
So this isn't just a one-off situation that we're watching here in Washoe County. This is part of a greater scheme of things that has been happening.
And it's happening across the country.
So it's
not in every state, but in a growing number of states, you're seeing the same argument with progressives in the Democratic Party and with the Trump supporters wanting to replace anyone that doesn't want to, sort of, it's everything Trump. That's the approach of the Trump administration. And now it's the approach of this Trump movement is that only candidates that Trump endorses, only candidates that adopt Trump's agenda. That's where this is right now on the Republican side. That's the argument that happened in Clark is now happening in Washoe. And of course, the reality is, I was just talking with my students, asking them how many are card-holding or active members of the party. 4 out of 40. That's 4 times as many as I've ever seen.
Wow.
But the reality is that you don't have a lot of people that participate. A lot of them ignore like the regular meeting at this point in time because the campaigns aren't underway yet. And so it's much easier to step in and disrupt. And that's what has happened on both sides.
Wow. That is an interesting perspective to take into consideration because one of the mistakes I feel like I'm making in this process as I'm discovering what happened at the Washoe County Party is that I'm making it look, I'm focusing on the drama as well, the drama between individuals as opposed to where this plays a part in the greater scheme of things. And is that a mistake that not just I might be as a reporter making, but maybe the public as well?
Oh, yes. And most news organizations. Understanding a situation is not sort of a common practice anymore in news organizations. Reporting events is. And so events can be reported with no context. We see that all the time. This is good journalism. Getting behind and trying to understand why. But most media just reports one.
Do you think, just in reference to that response, do you think that's playing a part and playing a factor in driving this narrative of these kind of situations as more of a character battle versus a basic story battle?
It's not party organization. It's not party agreed to platforms. It's now personality driven. It's now element of the party driven. So in one case progressive, in one case I can't call Trump conservative. So it's beyond the conservative agenda, which had paralyzed the Republican Party for years. Now it's sort of a subset of that of Trump, who is a form of conservatism, but his policies are all conservative. So. But yes, I mean, there are elements of those. And the results are that national polls tell us that only 24% of Americans identify now with the Republican Party, and only 27% of Americans identify with the Democratic Party. So do the math. 49% of Americans no longer identify with either of the two major parties in the United States political system. They don't see policies or candidates that make sense to them. And when you get survey data, what do they ask? Which party are you a member of? Which party do you identify with? Well, actually, most of the people they call say, I don't identify with either. If you talk to people who are predicting polls, I'm kind of, in most parts of the country, it's called independent. Here it's called nonpartisan. Right. So they say that they're nonpartisans. And then they don't take the interview because they're looking for someone who's a Democrat or a Republican. So they're interviewing the 24% and making it sound like that's a significant number, but it's only identifying 24% of the electorate. And 24% cannot win an election. This is what we've always said about Donald Trump. He never had a popularity rating that was 50%. He, in essence, has been down in the 30% range and has fallen sometimes as low as 25 or 26%. That can't win an election. And now you hit the progressives can't win an election. Their support on the Democratic side is a subset of what's needed to win an election. But the people who are voting can't find anyone on either side that they can vote for. It's a very frustrating time to be a voter. And a lot of nose holding is going on.
So this isn't the situation of a lesser two evils kind of thing. It's none of the above tends to be the...
Yeah, we're past lesser two evils. We're down to none of the above. Because for most Americans, they are just right of center. That has been our history for 235 years. And so the policies of the Democratic Party and their candidates is seemingly too far to the left, and the policies of the candidates and the party on the Republican side are too far to the right. And they are sitting there in the middle trying to figure out who they can support and who they can vote for. And that describes right now as a third of the electorate that has physically moved to that category in most states, and it's growing every day. It is going to become the largest. It's going to become the second category in Clark County. It's growing so fast, it's under 100,000 separating them from the Republicans now in Clark County. And Clark County matters. It's 80% of the vote. You can win a state election if you carry enough votes in Clark County. Right. So we always want to pay attention to Clark and what's going on there. And it now mirrors what we're doing. Said another way, we now have, if we were to check, we'd probably find that Democrats have more voter registrations than Republicans in Washoe County. Washoe County has been a Republican county since its founding. It has never been a Democratic county. It's now split in half. People who are moving to Nevada are different in terms of their political stripe. People who are living in Nevada are rethinking their party affiliations based on the behavior of parties and candidates. And if we're looking for a microcosm, we're talking about Washoe County and their infighting in the party, but we just had Fiore announce that she's running for governor. How many declared candidates for the Republican nomination do we have now for governor? It's up to 6, 7, maybe 8. That's a sign of a broken party. The party cannot guide that conversation, cannot regulate that process. But that can be devastating to the Republicans. That sucks a lot of money out of the campaign process. That creates hard feelings within the party. They're going to fight. They're going to say nasty things about each other. It's going to turn off voters for the primary election that picks who goes forward, and it's going to damage that candidate before they even start their campaign for fall. That's not what a political party should be doing. It should be doing the exact opposite, but it can't control it. There's an anarchy that is now settled into the Republican Party, and there's the risk of an anarchy that is settling into the Democratic Party. Instead of resolving differences and working together, they're pulling apart.
So as this is going on, for our very eyes, and for your eyes as well, and it must be interesting to observe as a political scientist in that regard.
It's frustrating.
Really?
Well, because the system's broken. We've talked for the last 20 or 30 years that the system isn't working the way it was supposed to be, the way it was designed to work. Well, we're now even further off the rails. And so it's extremely frustrating because, Congress doesn't play the role that it's supposed to play. The president has to rule by executive order because they can't get balance and cooperation going at that level. We see it play out at the state and local levels. We take sides. We don't find middle ground. The political process, as our founders intended, is no longer working. And what it does is create a lot of chaos and confusion. It unnerves voters. We lose support. We start to distrust government more. We start to worry about our future more. Many have argued we are seeing the unraveling of our democracy right in front of us. And no one seems to care, and no one seems to be able to figure out how to stop it.
With that being said, I naturally have to ask the question of precedent. Is there precedent for this? Have we seen this before, or is this something we've never seen before?
We've been a chaotic country our entire existence. Politically, we argued over slavery at the Summer Convention. We protected southern states, but had tensions between the two sides throughout the early part of our republic, went to civil war over that. We have been a two-sided argument nation for all 235 years, but we've lost the art of compromise twice in our existence. We had an all-out civil war in the mid-1800s, and we now are finding that we are at the same point of division in 2021. You have people talking about the coming civil war in 2021. This time it's over left versus right, red versus blue, rural versus urban. It's a different kind of civil war. But each side doesn't feel that the other side understands them or is even an American to them anymore. We are from two different Americas now. Just as you would have said in the Civil War of the 19th century that we were representing two different Americas, one that could tolerate the institution of slavery and one that could not. We're back at that point for the first time.
So if we were serious, it's that bad of a situation. That the divide between right and left is no longer an ideological difference of governance, but a very difference of opinion on how to even run the country.
Exactly. And it's so fundamental that, when Joe Biden was elected, it was with this notion that I'm a guy that's been a part of the process. I can find that middle ground with the other side. He has not found the middle ground with the other side. He's now trying to figure out how to govern with his own party, which is now divided, progressive versus moderate. So he's got the division in his own party. He can't govern. And the next, depending on who wins in 2022, they're not going to be able to govern. But this is moving down to the state levels where you now have gerrymandering out of control. Republican states are making sure they never lose control of their states. Democratic states are making sure they never lose control of their states. So we are literally fortifying the division. So that the federal system is now working against us. The notion of issues that we thought we'd resolve, like abortion, are now open for re-examination. We have a Supreme Court that's been shifted from a sort of divided Supreme Court to a conservative Supreme Court that is going to make a lot of social decisions that are going to make a lot of people unhappy. So we're not moving in a positive direction. We're moving into more divisiveness going forward. I tell my students that my greatest fear and growing expectation is that they will live in dictatorship in their lifetime in America. That the democracy is in its throes of its existence. And I'm sincere about that. People are not thinking about the consequences of their behavior. Even the pandemic. The pandemic's not about our social ethos is to be willing to do things because we know it will benefit others. It's the empathy. It's the understanding that we're all in this together. We have lost that in America. We now take sides on whether a mask is a violation of a freedom, whether a shot is a violation of a freedom. It's not based on science. It's based on a belief system that I don't like you because I don't trust you. And you're trying to take something from me. And this is the most fundamental unraveling that society can make, and it puts us at greatest risk. It's not what you think it's about, but I will tell you that yes, this is serious on a level. We can't make the excuse that we've been chaotic, but this is bat crap crazy, interesting discourse like we were at the point of the Civil War.
I'm going to continue with this lie because I think it's endemic to what I'm dealing with. Because I think you talk about distrust as being the fundamental identifier of what's going on underplaying American politics. So I naturally want to ask, from your standpoint, what do you think the solution should be or could be?
Well, we're running out of solutions. The division is so deep and so structured, increasingly structured, that unraveling and fixing that is more daunting than probably we've ever been. I think our risk of actually cleaving over this, like we did in 1861, is increasingly likely. And it's going to be an event. I'm always indicating to my students that if you want to close that, sure. That how does dictatorship happen in America? And it happens over crisis. So it's either a major health pandemic where so many people are dying that everybody supports the government imposing martial law, suspending the Constitution, putting military in the street to restore order, and to get control over the pandemic. I'm talking about this was a small pandemic. A big pandemic is considered 3 million. A real pandemic is considered like 25 or 30 million dying in the United States. That would trigger a fascist government that would not bring the Constitution down. Economic collapse. Racial tension. We are a country that has not dealt with race. race. So race could pull us apart. Or a coordinated terrorist attack. And so I use that as an example to point out that none of us can identify what it will be, but something will happen that will be a tipping point that will allow the government to either cancel an election or ignore the results of an election. And there will be some portion of the population that supports it and some portion of the population that absolutely doesn't, and that will be the point of tension that will lead to civil war. We saw the coup of January 6th as an attempt to disregard the results of the popular vote and put a fix into the Electoral College. And a lot of people, because we aren't getting a new Voting Rights Act passed, are very much afraid that by 2024, that may be our swan song as a democracy. That we may see democracy ended in violence in Washington, D.C. over who the legitimate next president is. That's how close we are to it.
Continuing on that line of logic, where you have one political party that appears from the leader itself to run a narrative of a lie, for lack of a better word, the thought that Donald Trump won the election, or that Donald Trump was robbed of the election. You have another party who basically has rejected that wholesale and is trying to govern as is. Can both of these narratives exist in the same ecosystem of our democracy?
Not for long. It's what's creating it's laying the groundwork for collapse of democracy at this point in time. No one knows what truth is. We don't have any absolutes in our democracy. But remember, 73% of Republicans believe in the big lie. Now, they're only 24% of the electorate. We don't make that connection. But that many are willing to believe Donald Trump when he says that the election was rigged just unravels the democracy. Social media is destroying the democracy. I've started seeing articles in the last 3 weeks that say, maybe we should do something about social media. Maybe we don't have Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. But I think it's a matter of it should not be a source of information because there's so much bias. The Russians used it because they saw it was so powerful and influential. That's how they've tried to topple us in several elections, and they're doing a good job. I mean, they're running this stuff. We think we're getting it. We don't know that we're getting all of it. And so we have the threat from without. You had asked earlier if there are things we can do. I think we have to revisit social media. I think we have to look at news reporting, which has gone almost completely to hell in this country. It's owned by agenda-focused corporations that push a particular slant into every one of their media markets. Because nobody knows where their information is coming from, they just get onto one source and think they're being told the truth. So if you don't fix the news, that's a requisite to a democracy. You have to have accurate and adequate information for the voter to be able to make a decision. And we don't have that in our democracy. We'd have to fix that. Our elections are money bought. We'd have to completely reform our election process. The parties would have to be held far more accountable than they currently are. We have 59 other democracies that are working better than we are. So we have 59 other examples to learn from in terms of how to regulate it and structure our media and still respect our freedom of speech. But we have had limits to the freedom of speech since Schenck versus U.S. And what they told us were two very important things. One, that no freedom is absolute. Even our political rights are limited by responsible use. And we are seeing tremendous irresponsibility today that is a threat to our democracy, our way of political life, and our future as a country. And I think those are high stakes that justify a national dialogue and action that would address that. People have to wake up and pay attention. We need everybody voting. They need to understand what the stakes are, and they need to get engaged. And we see people turning off the news, turning away from politics because it's so negative, it's so destructive. They don't know what to believe or who to trust. We're unraveling. Every time you turn around, you are seeing unraveling happen. And good people just get consumed by it. Those speaking the truth or speaking to the truth get ignored because that's not the headlines that they want to share.
So going back to my original point, and I don't think we've really gotten away from it, but I think you've kind of explained it.
Oh, yeah. I'm really tangential, so it's best to pull back.
No worries. I appreciate that.
I'll tell you that. So I have to admit.
Thank you. I feel like you've kind of answered my question of why what happened with the county party. You know, these strong elements who believed in narrative, who pushed their way through, got what they wanted. They have control of the party apparatus now, and what do you think will likely happen?
Well, what will happen is that a growing number of voters will become aware that this has happened, and they'll stop paying attention to the party apparatus, and will ultimately leave the party. And it's true for both sides. You'll see a continued growth in the number of those in the nonpartisan category. And I think in many states that's going to become the largest element. And then that offers a possible path to fixing if we can survive all of this long enough. Because what happens is, I've already been telling anyone that will listen to the parties that you need to avoid the edges. The Democratic Party has to stay in the middle, the Republican Party has to stay in the middle, and they have to appeal to that now third of our electorate that sits in nonpartisan. That's a huge voting bloc. And they vote. They made the effort to leave a party. That shows interest and frustration. So if both parties begin to focus on this growing nonpartisan bloc in the state of Nevada, by nature it will moderate their parties, moderate their leadership and their candidates, and it will bring us back towards the center where America is and always has been as a nation. And that will allow each of the two parties to right themselves and to be credible again, and to find a different stripe of candidate that's more acceptable and vote-worthy. But the other trend that's occurring in the state is we were a purple state. We have historically been a red state. We have become a blue state, and we're becoming a stronger blue state by the day. And so that's the other reality in Nevada, is that what happens in the Republican Party may become less relevant as the Democratic Party becomes stronger in the state.
So you're saying that the solution may actually be kind of like a fire situation, where you have a fire that starts uncontrolled, burns out of control, and then burns itself out.
Yeah, and in this part, it's because so many are leaving both parties and moving to the center because it's not ultra conservatives that are leaving the Republican Party, or ultra progressives that are leaving the Democratic Party. It's the moderated. They don't feel like their voice is being heard in either of those parties, and that's mostly what America has always been, and probably will always be, just trying to center. So yes, that can be sort of a self-fix in the system if we have enough time. Because we're talking about a lot of things happening that doesn't address any of the national politics. And that's where the Constitution resides. That's where, fundamentally we could see a real shift away from our democracy is at the national level. But here at the state level, I think the growing number of nonpartisans are the future of how we stabilize our two-party system in Nevada and get back on track.
So, kind of circling back to the thesis statement of our conversation today of what's happening at Washoe County, and it is not just an isolated incident here in Washoe County. It's happening at other parties. It's happening at a bigger scale, and it's also part of a systemic issue that's causing organized dysfunction in the body politic and in the body democracy. That would be the fair assessment of your assessment.
It would be the fair assessment.
So, we're in the middle of a fire, naturally, as I use that analogy. Is there a firefighter we can look to? Is there some element that can quell the heat or something to suppress the fire?
It's hard to lead during crisis. Nobody wants to listen to you, or there's a large group that will always write you off. So one party can't fix it for both parties. They both have issues right now. We have to rely on osmosis. We have to, put faith in the growing nonpartisan bloc to bring common sense back to the Nevada party system.
I want to continue with the narrative of one of these parties, the Republican Party, and the narrative of the big lie, and the thought that Donald Trump got cheated in election integrity policies. Where do you see that natural inevitability of where it's going?
Well, it looks like it's getting more toxic. I mean, it's becoming now represented in state and local political races. And so we're taking the national narrative and seeing it plugged in. And that's the whole purpose of the takeover in the county level in both locations, is to be able to get that narrative into the 2022 election for assembly, for Senate, for constitutional officers, for the governorship. And each side has that agenda. The progressives want a progressive agenda. The Republicans that are taking over want a Trump agenda that buys into the great lie that says that you have a constitutional right to not wear a mask, and not to have to do anything that government tells you, which is insane. But yeah, people are drinking the Kool-Aid right now, but again, party structure in America is not all that influential, so it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a whole lot of damage. Ultimately, campaigns control their campaigns, and they'll be looking at poll data and how voters are reacting to particular ideas. What's bringing them money is most important. They'll apparently say almost anything to get more contributions on each side. But the idea here is that may help moderate the agendas, at least by the fall election. But for the primary, we're going to see a lot of extremism. And unfortunately, primaries are usually dominated by that. Another thing that may help in Nevada is the arrival of mail-in balloting and same-day registration. Because we aren't doing any crazy gerrymandering in the state like going on, say, in a state like Texas. So we're making the voting process more accessible. We've validated it. All 17 registrars go through their rituals. The state secretary of state goes through their rituals. So we know we get valid results, but we are seeing improved turnout. Improved turnout likely means more of those that are sitting in that weird nonpartisan area, but also activating new types of voters in Nevada, Hispanic voters, and voters under the age of 25. I'm seeing that in my classroom. There's more political interest to get involved than I've seen in my entire political career as a political scientist. So it's been a sleeping giant of sorts. The least activated is the under 25.
18, 25.
But they are looking for a different reality in politics, and you know, faculty like myself telling them how important it is for them to pay attention and get involved. And so I'm listening to what they find so frustrating about the process. We just looked at today why people don't vote. And there are a lot of reasons that turn you off for voting, but making it easier through the mail-in balloting, so it arrives in your mailbox. Having that time plus early voting for 10 days plus voting on election day. But I'm expecting that in Nevada now we will go to a good 70% of the vote being early, either through the 10-day or the mail-in, with the least amount of votes occurring on election day. And that just empowers a whole lot of Nevadans to be able to have their voice heard, and that's a positive development that can help us all as well. And send a strong message to two parties about where their message, where their support, and where their candidates need to be.
So the message I'm getting overall is that the system here in Nevada, at least at the state level, will likely moderate and not...
There's a good chance of being moderated, yes.
And not tinge to the extremes. Right. By a function of higher voter participation, basically tempering election results and likely delivering election results to more moderate, less extreme candidates.
Correct. And the problem, though, is it's dioptic because, unfortunately, at the national level, they're going in a much more destructive direction. Now, it's possible, as we talk about righting the ship, it looks like Biden has made some progress. In the absence of compromise in Washington, it's getting the Democratic Party to be able to address its problems, and Biden looks like he's trying to make some progress there. In compromise, what it looks like is that instead of $3.5 million for human infrastructure, it's going to be closer to $2 million. That's a $1.5 trillion savings there. And then we know it's about $1.2 trillion for the traditional infrastructure. If they can get the progressives to sign on to that, and the moderates, like mentioned, then we will see Washington start to work, which is one of the ways it's supposed to work, is that the party plays well with itself. It's got the majority. It can pass law. And we'll see Washington doing something. that could be positive because that would put the Republicans on the outs. Their strategies of division then fail because that's what they're trying to do. McConnell wakes up every morning trying to figure out a new way to block Joe Biden from getting his agenda. It's become nasty. Instead of working with Joe Biden to find things that Republicans could support. And so that could begin to rank the ship at the national level and set the stage for 2022, where you start seeing these things implemented. It usually doesn't go well for the party in power, but this could be a different election that the voters send a message that they don't like the craziness, they don't like the lying. I don't know if the voters can wake up in time to do that, but there is hope. Guys have to have hope, and that's where the hope is at the national.
I appreciate you going in depth and going above the 50,000-foot level for me for this, because it helps to understand where this plays in the factor in the big ball game, and as well as to understand that there's a little more inside baseball. There's the game itself.
I do have to get going, if that's okay. And Kelly, you're working with one of the absolute best people in baseball. I love that guy. I wish we could bottle him because we're missing that quality of journalism today. So he's a wonderful mentor for you.
Thank you. I am grateful every day that I get to work with him as well. So thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for redirecting my mind and my perspective on a very challenging topic, as I feel that I was getting in the weeds of the issue as opposed to looking at the field.
And get perspective. I'm always happy to have those conversations. I just did that with the AP as they get ready to do reporting in 2022 in the state. Talked to NBC based on the same thing, just because they actually called and just wanted context. Somebody who's inside the state and understands the state politics.
Shut this guy off, sure. And that's in my interview with Professor Fred Lokken at Truckee Mountain Community College on Wednesday, October 20th.